The Silent Path to Decay, generated by StoryWave.ai. Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Leave a story idea in the comments below so we can create it for you.
Chapter 1. The Ascent of Helena. The sun hung low, painting the horizon in desperate strokes of crimson and gold. Helena stood atop the hill, the wind tousling her dark brown locks, her green eyes scanning the decrepit landscape below. The world, once vibrant and teeming with life, was now a tableau of desolation. Yet, amidst the destruction, Helena, clad in her weathered ranger gear, the compass tattoo on her wrist, catching the dying light, remained a warning signal of determination. "You reckon we'll make it by nightfall?" The voice belonged to Becca, her petite frame barely noticeable among the ruins. The locket at her neck glinted, an evidence to a world that once was. Helena turned, her gaze never faltering. "We have to," she replied with a certainty that belied the gnawing doubt in her gut. "The camp's our best shot at a new start." The air was thick with the stench of decay, a constant reminder of the virus that had ravaged the land, leaving behind only the hollow shells of those once called neighbors, friends, family. Elena's hand instinctively went to the knife at her belt as they descended into what was once a bustling town, now a graveyard of civilization. Soph, a wisp of a girl with a gaze far too wise for her years, trailed behind. "I heard stories, about the camps," she murmured, her voice barely rising above a whisper. Helena glanced back, a frown creasing her brow. "People talk, Soph. Doesn't mean they're true." A rustling from a nearby alleyway cut through the silence, sending a shiver down Elena's spine. She motioned for silence, her every sense on high alert. From the shadows emerged a small figure, the red baseball cap unmistakable even in the dimming light. "Joe." Helena breathed, recognizing the boy who once played in the park she patrolled. Now, he was a mere echo of the child he used to be, his movements sluggish, his brown eyes glazed over. Becca's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Is there anything left of him?" Elena's heart ached, but her face was a mask of resolve. "We can't afford to find out." They skirted around the boy, each step a weighty reminder of the world they'd lost. Elena's thoughts drifted unbidden to her own past, to the moments and choices that had left scars much deeper than the one on her cheek. But this was not the time for reflection. This was the time for survival. As they drew closer to the supposed sanctuary of the refugee camp, the frequency of their macabre encounters increased. Each shuffling figure that crossed their path was a stark reminder of the fine line they walked between life and undeath. Elena's blade sang a grim lullaby, each swing a necessary severing of ties to the world she once knew. Soph's hand found Elena's, her grip surprisingly strong. "We're gonna make it, right?" Her hazel eyes searched Elena's face for any sign of doubt. Elena's response was a firm nod. "We'll make it, and we'll keep making it, because that's what we do." The camp was in sight now, a huddled mass of tents and makeshift barricades that promised a reprieve, however fleeting. Elena's steps quickened, driven by a force that was part resolve, part desperation. She could almost taste the safety, the chance to breathe without waiting for the next horror to reveal itself. They paused at the threshold, the chaos of the camp buzzing like a distant storm. Helena turned to her companions, her voice steady. "We're here. But remember, this isn't the end. It's just another beginning." And with that, Helena Torres, former park ranger, skilled survivor, and unwitting harbinger of humanity's fragile hope, led her small band of weary souls into the fray, her ascent into this new world marked by the silent path to decay. Chapter 2. An Omen on the Shore. Helena watched the huddled figures trudging along the rocky beach, their silhouettes a cavalcade of despair against the backdrop of a churning gray sea. The camp buzzed with the arrival of newcomers, each face telling a story of loss and survival. Among them, young Jose, his once vibrant eyes now hollow, his steps unsteady. "More mouths to feed, more trouble," muttered a grizzled man who stood beside Helena, his gaze as hard as the stones beneath their feet. Helena frowned but remained silent. Her gaze lingered on Jose, who clutched his red baseball cap as if it were a lifeline. Something about the boy tugged at her, a silent plea that she couldn't ignore. Sophia sidled up to Helena, her eyes wide with concern. "They look so broken," she said. Helena nodded, her instincts screaming caution. "Looks can be deceiving," she replied, the words tasting bitter. "Stay sharp. As the newcomers settled on the fringes of the camp, Helena moved in closer, her senses alert. She spotted Becca handing out water bottles to the refugees. The blonde teacher's compassion shone through her weary smile. "Be careful, Becca," Helena called out, her voice barely above the wind. Becca looked up and nodded, her locket glinting in the weak light. "We can't lose ourselves, Helena. Not now." Helena approached Jose, who sat alone, staring at the waves. "Hey, Joe," she said gently, "how are you holding up?" The boy's response was a shrug, his once lively demeanor now as lifeless as the debris-strewn shore. Helena crouched beside him, her scar a pale line in the grayness. "You're safe here, Joe. We'll look after you." Jose's gaze flickered, a spark of something that might have been gratitude or a warning. Throughout the day, Helena kept a watchful eye on the refugees. Her help was instinctive, yet each act of kindness left her exposed, her own shields worn a little thinner. As night fell, a quiet unease settled over the camp. Stories whispered of the illness that had swept through the world outside, its shadow now cast over this fragile sanctuary. Helena lay awake, her thoughts a tangled web. The risk of helping these strangers weighed against the pull of her own conscience. She could feel the foundation of her world shifting, the first tremors of a downfall she had yet to understand. In the stillness, Helena's hand found the compass inked upon her skin, its needle steady, even as her resolve wavered. She knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, the line between salvation and ruin blurring with each passing moment. Yet for Helena, the choice had already been made. Her heart would not allow her to turn away from those in need, even if it meant sowing the seeds of her own undoing. Chapter 3. A Bite in the Dark. The night draped the camp in a cloak of unease. Helena, her brow furrowed, patrolled the perimeter with a diligence born of necessity. The ocean's roar was a distant soundtrack to her thoughts, which were clouded with worry over the new arrivals. "You think we're safe here?" Sophia's voice cut through the silence, her slim figure appearing beside Helena like a wraith. Helena's grip on her knife tightened. "Safe as we can be, for now," she answered, her eyes never leaving the darkened tree line. The crackle of a walkie-talkie split the tension. "Helena, come quick." Becca's voice trembled over the airwaves. "It's Jose, he's—" Helena's heart raced as she bolted towards the source of the call, Sophia on her heels. They arrived at the medical tent to a scene of chaos. Jose, his small frame convulsing on a cot, his mouth frothing, a stark contrast to the boy with the red cap they once knew. Carlos, the stocky border patrol guard, struggled to restrain Jose, his deep voice a mix of commands and curses. "Help me," he barked, sweat beading on his shaved head. Helena leaped into action, her training kicking in. But in the struggle, Jose's teeth found Carlos's arm. A moment of stillness, a collective gasp, and then the realization of what had occurred settled like a heavy shroud over the crowd. Sophia clutched Helena's arm. "What do we do now?" Helena's green eyes searched the faces around her, each one a mirror of fear and confusion. We keep it contained," she said, though her words sounded hollow even to her own ears. But containment was a fleeting hope. Carlos's wound was a ticking time bomb, and despite their efforts, the virus coursed through his veins with a voracious speed. The camp, once a sanctuary, became a hunting ground as he turned, his piercing eyes now devoid of humanity, a growl emanating from his throat. Panic ensued, the survivors scattering like leaves in a storm. Helena stood firm, her resolve a warning signal in the pandemonium. With deft movements, she fought, her blade a silver flash in the dim light, her actions as precise as they were heartbreaking. The screams pierced the night, a clamor of terror and disbelief. The outbreak was upon them, a test of all they had built, all they hoped to preserve. Sophia's soft voice pulled Helena back from the brink. "We have to go, Helena. Now!" Helena's mind reeled. Flee or fight? The question hung in the air, as palpable as the danger that encroached. Her gaze fell upon the compass on her wrist, its needle unwavering, a symbol of direction, of purpose. Yet, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow on the chaos, Helena couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. A bite in the dark had brought their world crashing down, but it was the seeds of doubt, the questions that lurked in the shadows, that truly threatened to unravel the fabric of Helena's spirit. As she ushered Sophia and a handful of others towards a potential escape, Helena knew that this was more than a fight for survival. It was a battle for the soul of what remained. And as the sun rose, casting light on the devastation, Helena's path was clear, though it led her further into the heart of darkness. Chapter 4. The Fall of the Safe Haven. The camp, once a sanctuary, was now a labyrinth of panic and dread. Helena stood in the midst of the turmoil, her athletic build tense as she faced the crowd of survivors whose eyes were filled with accusation and despair. "Listen to me." Helena's voice cut through the chaos, her tone calm but authoritative. "We can organize, we can fortify the Menk." A man from the crowd, his face gaunt and eyes wild, interrupted her. "Organize? Look around, Helena. It's too late for that." Soph sidled up to Helena, her presence a quiet anchor. "Helena, we need a plan, and fast." Helena exhaled deeply, her green eyes sweeping the disarray of the camp. Tents were torn, supplies scattered, and the moans of the afflicted filled the air. In the midst of it all was Sophia, her black hair a stark contrast to the chaos, her hazel eyes reflecting an eerie calm. "Why aren't you scared, Soph?" Helena asked, her voice edged with curiosity and desperation. Sophia offered a shrug, her slim form betraying nothing of the secret she harbored. "Guess I've seen too much to be scared anymore." Helena turned back to the crowd. "We need to move out. It's our only chance. But where will we go?" Becca's voice was a warm yet fragile thread in the night. Helena's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of strategy and survival. "We'll head to the city. There might be a safe zone there." A murmur rippled through the survivors. Helena knew her words were a gamble, but their current predicament left no room for hesitation. As Helena led the group towards what she hoped would be salvation, the camp behind them descended into a commotion of terror. The once orderly rows of shelters now lay in shambles, the hope they represented all but extinguished. Sophia kept close, her eyes scanning the dwindling figures around them. She whispered, "My mom used to say, even in the darkest times, there's a light that never goes out." Helena nodded, her resolve fortified by Sophia's words. But even as they pressed forward, the gravity of their situation weighed heavily upon her. The camp had been her responsibility, and now it lay in ruins, its fall marking a bitter chapter in their fight for survival. The group stumbled through the dark, the city's skeletal skyline a grim lodestar in the distance. Every shadow, every snapping twig set their nerves on edge, a demonstration to the peril that stalked them. Helena's leadership, once a source of strength, now felt like a burden too heavy to bear. The safe haven she had believed in had crumbled, and with it, a part of her certainty in the world they could build. Yet as the survivors followed her lead, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear, Helena knew there was no turning back. The fall of the camp was a harsh lesson, but one she would not allow to be in vain. With each step towards the city, Helena felt the weight of her choices, the cost of her determination. But she pushed on, the image of the camp engulfed by the virus's merciless tide, fueling her drive to find a new refuge, a new hope, amidst the silent path to decay. Chapter 5. The Path of Shadow. Helena led the survivors through the dense underbrush, the mountains looming ahead like silent guardians. The city was a distant memory, and the camp a scattered dream. They moved as quietly as possible, the threat of the undead always just a heartbeat away. "We need to stop soon," Becca whispered, her blonde hair sticking to her face. "The little ones are exhausted." Helena nodded, scanning the forest. "There's an old ranger cabin up ahead. We'll rest there." The group moved on, a collective of weary souls, each step a triumph over the dread that nipped at their heels. As they walked, the survivors shared stories of the past, laughter mingling with the rustling leaves, a brief respite from their grim reality. Suddenly, a figure stumbled into their path, its movements jerky and unnatural. A lone zombie, its clothes tattered, its eyes devoid of life. Helena's hand flew to her knife. "Get behind me," she ordered, her voice a low growl. Sophia stood close, her hazel eyes tracking Helena's movements. "You've done this before," she observed. Not a question, but a statement. Helena dispatched the threat with swift precision, her movements practiced. "Too many times," she replied, wiping her blade on the grass. Once at the cabin, the survivors huddled together, sharing what little food they had. The cabin, with its peeling paint and creaky floorboards, offered a temporary haven, a place to breathe. As night fell, Helena and Sophia found themselves alone outside, the sky a blanket of stars. Elena, Sophia started, her voice barely audible. I need to tell you something. Elena turned to face her, noting the serious look in Sophia's eyes. I don't get sick, not from the zombies. I think I'm immune, Sophia confessed, holding Elena's gaze. Elena's mind reeled at the implications. Are you sure? Sophia nodded, rolling up her sleeve to reveal a small birthmark on her forearm. I've been bitten before. Nothing happened. Elena considered the weight of this secret. We keep this between us for now. It's too dangerous if others find out. Sophia's eyes held understanding and a hint of fear. Okay, Elena, I trust you. The next morning, the group set off once more, the mountains calling to them with the promise of safety. Their journey was quiet, the air filled with unspoken thoughts and fears. They encountered more zombies, remnants of a world lost to the shadows. Each encounter was a dance with death, and Elena led them with a grim determination. Her mind, however, was on Sophia's secret, the knowledge an ember that threatened to ignite. As they scaled a steep incline, the survivors' bond strengthened, their shared hardships forging a unity that had been absent in the chaos of the camp. They moved as one, a unit adapting to the new world that demanded vigilance and sacrifice. Elena watched over them, her heart heavy with the responsibility she shouldered. The path of shadow stretched before them, a journey fraught with peril. But Elena knew that within this group, within this quest for the mountains, lay the faintest glimmer of hope. And so they marched on, their footsteps a silent testament to their resolve. The mountains drawing ever closer, their peaks shrouded in the light of a new dawn. Chapter 6. Betrayal among the ruins. The survivors had settled among the remnants of an old farmhouse, its walls a patchwork of wooden planks and crumbling brick. The air was tense, and the group's trust in each other had become as fragile as the shelter they now called home. Elena was standing guard by a shattered window when she heard the sound of faint rustling that set her senses on edge. Becca had been keeping watch with her, the locket around her neck catching the faint moonlight. Did you hear that? Elena whispered, her eyes narrowing as she strained to listen. Probably just the wind, Becca replied, her voice tinged with fatigue. Elena wasn't convinced. She moved away from the window, her steps silent on the dusty floorboards. The group needed rest, but the night was full of unseen threats. In the corner of the room, Sophia was huddled with a tattered book, her eyes flicking up to meet Elena's. We're not alone, are we? She asked, her voice barely above a murmur. Elena shook her head. Stay alert. We might have to move quickly. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the farmhouse, followed by the unmistakable groans of the undead. Elena's stomach dropped as she realized someone had left the back door ajar. Sophia, get everyone up, Elena commanded, dashing towards the breach. The group scrambled to their feet, groggy and disoriented. What's happening? Someone called out in the confusion. They're inside! Elena barked, her hand gripping her knife so tightly her knuckles turned white. The zombies poured in, their figures grotesque in the dim light. The group fought back desperately, but the horde kept coming, relentless and insatiable. Amidst the chaos, Elena spied the traitor, a young man named Tom, his eyes wild with fear. Why, Tom? Why did you do this? She demanded, dodging a lunging figure. I couldn't take it anymore. Tom yelled back, his voice cracking. I thought I could escape, that I could find help. Elena's heart raced as she cut down another zombie, her movements automatic. You've doomed us all. The group battled fiercely, the sound of their struggle a rattle of terror. Elena's trust in her judgment had been shattered, and now they were paying the price for her mistake. Sophia fought beside Elena, surprisingly agile and unfazed by the biting and clawing enemies. This way, she shouted, pointing towards a narrow escape through a collapsed wall. The survivors followed, stumbling over debris and each other in their haste to flee. The farmhouse, once a haven, was now a tomb. As they regrouped in the relative safety of the woods, Elena's eyes met Sophia's. Your secret's going to get out, she said, her voice heavy with implication. Sophia's shoulders sagged. I know, but we need to trust each other, Elena, more than ever. Elena's gaze swept over the ragged group. The betrayal had cut deep, not just physically, but in the trust that bound them. As the group's leader, Elena felt the weight of their survival on her shoulders. The farmhouse, now a distant silhouette against the night sky, was a stark reminder of the cost of fear. And as they pressed on, each survivor carried the burden of the night's events. The knowledge that among them walked someone untouched by the virus, an anomaly that could be either their salvation or their undoing. Chapter 7. The Siege of Silence. The foothills loomed around Helena and the survivors, a rugged barricade against the relentless pursuit of the undead. With each elevation they climbed, the air grew thinner, and the groans of their pursuers echoed like a grim chorus through the trees. "We can't keep this pace up forever," Becca said, clutching her side as she stumbled over a gnarled root. Helena cast a glance over her shoulder, her green eyes scanning the tree line. "Just a bit further. We'll make our stand at the crest." As they reached a clearing with a panoramic view of the valley below, the group formed a defensive circle. Helena could see the determination etched on each face, mingling with the unmistakable shadow of fear. Sophia emerged from the group, her black hair plastered to her forehead. "They'll be here soon," she stated, her voice steady despite the odds. Helena nodded, tightening her grip on her weapon. "This is where we hold them. For every one of us, there's 10 of them. Remember that." The survivors braced themselves as the first wave of zombies broke through the underbrush. The sound of their approach was a rattling whisper that clawed at the nerves. The fight was brutal and unrelenting. Helena moved through the fray, her every strike precise and lethal. Beside her, Sophia fought with a quiet ferocity, her own blade a blur. Tom, the young man who had betrayed them once, was now a whirlwind of redemption, his makeshift club swinging wildly as he protected a cluster of the younger survivors. The battle raged on, the survivors' breaths coming in ragged gasps, their arms heavy with exertion. The zombies seemed endless, a tidal wave of decay that threatened to sweep them away. "We can't hold them," a survivor shouted, his voice laced with panic. Helena glanced at Sophia, whose eyes were locked on the oncoming horde. "We don't have a choice." A cry of pain cut through the noise, and Helena's heart sank as she saw one of their own go down, overwhelmed by the swarming enemies. "Fight!" Helena yelled, her voice a rallying cry that pierced the cacophony. "Fight for your lives!" The group rallied, their defense tightening like the coils of a spring. Each survivor became a symbol of resistance, their sheer willpower a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield, the group's resolve was tested to its limits. The zombies, though mindless, were relentless, their numbers an oppressive force that bore down on the living. Finally, as the moon rose to cast its silvery glow over the blood-stained grass, the tide began to turn. The zombies' ranks thinned, their numbers dwindling until only a few stragglers remained. Helena and her band of survivors stood panting, their bodies aching, their spirits battered but unbroken. The silence that followed was a respite, a fleeting moment of peace in a world gone mad. As they tended to their wounds and mourned their losses, the survivors knew that the siege was more than a battle. It was a tribute to their enduring spirit, and a grim reminder of the cost of survival in a land where silence was the herald of doom. Chapter 8. Whispers of the Lost. The night's veil lifted to unveil the grim reality of their situation. The group, once a cohesive unit, now appeared fragmented, scattered across the rugged terrain of the foothills like leaves after a storm. Helena surveyed the faces around her, each lined with the dirt and exhaustion of the siege. "We need to count our supplies," she said, trying to inject some sense of order into the dawn's quiet. Tom, his face shadowed by regret, shuffled over to the remnants of their rations. "We're low on everything, Helena. Food, water, medicine." The words hung between them, a stark reminder of their plight. Becca cradled a young girl in her arms, her locket swinging gently as she rocked back and forth. The girl's leg was bandaged, a dark stain spreading across the cloth. Helena knelt beside them, her voice low. "How is she?" Becca's eyes met Helena's, a glimmer of tears breaking through. "Not good. She needs more than we can give." A murmur rose from the group, a collective realization that hard choices lay ahead. Sophia, her gaze distant, spoke up. "We can't take her with us. Not like this." The words were a blow, a crack in the facade of their unity. Disagreements broke out, the stress of survival pitting friend against friend. "We're not leaving anyone behind," one survivor argued, his voice raw with emotion. Helena stood, her figure commanding attention despite her own turmoil. "Listen to me. We can't help her if we're all dead. We need to move, to find a place where she can heal. The group fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. The decision to leave the wounded was anathema to everything they had fought for, yet in the harsh light of day, it was the only choice that promised any chance of salvation. As the group prepared to move out, Helena pulled Sophia aside. "Keep an eye on Tom. I need to know he's with us." Sophia nodded, her hazel eyes reflecting the gravity of their situation. "I will. You can count on me." The journey resumed, each step away from the wounded a heavy burden. The group's numbers had dwindled, their morale frayed by the constant battle for survival. Yet, Helena led them forward, her resolve unyielding even as the specter of defeat loomed over them. The foothills gave way to a dense forest, the canopy above a tapestry of green and gold. The beauty of the world, untouched by the chaos that had befallen humanity, was a cruel contrast to the survivors' despair. As night approached, the group settled into a makeshift camp, the fire's glow a small comfort against the encroaching darkness. Around the flames, the survivors spoke in hushed tones, their voices a chorus of the lost and the living. "We'll find a way," Helena assured them, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that clawed at her heart. Sophia sat close, her presence a silent support. "We have to," she replied, the words almost lost to the crackling fire. The group's journey was far from over, their path fraught with unseen dangers. But under Helena's leadership, they pressed on, each day a covenant to their determination, each night a whisper of the hope that still flickered within their weary souls. Chapter 9. Echoes of Conscience. Helena surveyed the small circle of tired faces illuminated by the flickering campfire. The once abundant green forest around them had become a constricting cage of shadows and whispers. Supplies had dwindled to a few cans of beans and a half-empty water jug. "We can't keep going like this," muttered Tom, breaking the silence with a voice that carried the weight of their collective weariness. Helena's eyes met his. "We're doing the best we can. We just have to make it over the next ridge. There might be a place to resupply." Becca, sitting across the campfire with the locket still around her neck, shook her head. "And if there's not? We're not just low on food and water, Helena. We're low on hope." Sophia sat apart from the group, her knees drawn up to her chest. The others cast furtive glances her way, a mixture of awe and suspicion in their eyes. The fire popped and a log tumbled, sparking and crackling. Tom cleared his throat. "The truth is, not everyone's happy with the calls you're making, Helena. Some are saying we should have stayed at the farmhouse." Helena bit her lip, her gaze flickering over the group. "I'm making decisions to keep us alive. If anyone thinks they can do better, step up." The silence that followed was heavy, each person avoiding eye contact, lost in their own thoughts of what might have been. It was Sophia who finally spoke, her voice a soft contrast to the crackling fire. "What if I told you I could help? That maybe I could find us some help?" All eyes turned to her. "What do you mean?" Helena asked, her curiosity piqued despite the tension. Sophia hesitated, then lifted her sleeve, revealing the birthmark on her forearm. "I'm not like the others. I don't get sick from them, from the bites." A collective gasp rose from the group, and murmurs began to spread like wildfire. "How's that possible?" Becca asked, her blue eyes wide with shock. "I don't know," admitted Sophia, "but it's true." Tom stood up, his shadow long in the firelight. "You're saying you've been bitten, and you're fine?" Sophia nodded, and the group erupted into questions, some voices tinged with fear, others with a desperate hope. Helena raised her hands, calling for order. "This changes things. If Sophia's immune, she could be the key to getting us out of this. But what if it makes her a target?" Becca's concern was evident. "What if people want to use her, or worse?" Helena pondered, the weight of leadership never heavier upon her shoulders. "Then we protect her with everything we've got." The fire dwindled, the night pressing in. The group settled into an uneasy silence, each person wrestling with the revelation and its implications. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but one thing was clear. Helena's choices would shape the fate of every soul in the flickering light of their makeshift camp. The realization was a haunting echo in her conscience, a reminder that the mantle of leadership was both a shield and a heavy burden. Chapter 10. A Glimmer in the Gloom. Helena's boots crunched over the gravel as the group navigated the treacherous path toward what they hoped was safety. Tom's map, salvaged from a roadside gas station, spoke of a place untouched by the chaos of potential safe zone. Elena peered ahead, her sharp eyes catching the slightest movements. Stay close. We're not alone out here. Sophia walked by her side, her steps quiet and assured. How do we know this safe zone is real? It's a chance we have to take, Elena replied, keeping her voice low. Becca, still clutching her locket, chimed in from behind. It's better than waiting to be picked off one by one. A new face in the group, Martin, a survivor with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, piped up. If we make it, I have ideas. Sophia's immunity, it could be the breakthrough we need. Sophia glanced at him, her brow furrowed. What do you mean? Elena, can we stop for a moment? Martin asked, his tone eager. Elena nodded, and the group huddled together amidst the ruins of a crumbling brick building, the remnants of a world they once knew. Martin explained, his words careful. Your immunity, it's not just luck. It's in your blood. Maybe it can help others, maybe even stop this whole nightmare. Sophia's eyes widened, reflecting the burden of this new possibility. Elena watched the exchange, her gut tight. We can't get ahead of ourselves. First, we need to survive. As they set off again, the group moved with renewed caution, aware that the groaning figures that now roamed the earth were once people just like them. The journey was fraught with danger at every turn. They ducked into abandoned cars and behind overgrown bushes, hiding from wandering zombies that seemed to sense their living breaths. At one point, a lone undead, its clothes tattered and face unrecognizable, blocked their path. Elena stepped forward, her knife at the ready, and dispatched it with a swift, silent motion. Good job, Tom whispered, and the group continued, their hearts pounding in their chests. They were close now, the safe zone just beyond a steep ridge lined with trees. Their pace quickened, despite their exhaustion, the prospect of sanctuary pushing them forward. As they ascended the hill, the land opened up to reveal a valley with high walls and the faintest flicker of lights. It's real, Becca breathed, her voice a mix of awe and relief. Elena allowed herself a small smile, but her mind raced with the implications of Martin's theory and the dangers it could bring to Sophia. We're not out of the woods yet, she cautioned, her voice steady. Let's get inside those walls before we celebrate. The group approached the safe zone with a mixture of hope and trepidation, their eyes scanning for any sign of threat. The gates loomed before them, a promise of protection and perhaps a future. As the gates opened, Elena felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. But it was tempered by the knowledge that inside those walls, Sophia's secret would be a balefire, drawing both the desperate and the dangerous. They stepped into the safe zone, the gates closing behind them with a resounding clang. The group exchanged weary glances, each silently wondering what this new chapter would hold. Elena looked at Sophia, then at the faces of her fellow survivors. They had made it this far, but the journey was far from over. The realization of the challenges ahead was a quiet echo in her mind, a flicker of doubt amid the hope of sanctuary. Chapter 11. The Price of Salvation. Elena led the group through the dense thicket, the safe zone's tall walls looming like giants ahead. The air hummed with an eerie silence as they approached, each step a mixture of hope and caution. Almost there, Elena whispered, her hand tightening around the hilt of her knife. Sophia trudged close behind, her expression unreadable. Martin kept glancing her way, his eyes filled with a scientist's curiosity and something more, something like greed. Tom, who had been keeping watch at the rear, suddenly hissed, "Wait, I hear something." The group halted, straining their ears. A rustling in the bushes, a crack of a branch, the signs of an impending threat. "Get down!" Elena commanded, just as a group of strangers burst from the tree line, weapons at the ready. "Elena, what do we do?" Becca's voice was steady, but her grip on the locket betrayed her worry. "We defend ourselves," Elena said, her voice low but clear. The attackers were upon them, their faces grim with determination. "We just want the girl," one shouted, pointing at Sophia. Martin stepped forward, hands raised. "You can't have her." Sophia looked at Elena, fear flashing in her eyes. "Elena, I can't." "Yes, you can," Elena cut her off. "Stay behind me." The skirmish was swift and fierce. Elena parried and struck with practiced precision, her movements a testament to her ranger days. Tom swung a makeshift club, keeping the attackers at bay. In the chaos, Sophia slipped away, darting for the safe zone's gates. Martin followed, calling after her. Sophia, wait! Elena caught a glimpse of the girl's figure disappearing into the safe zone and knew she had to make a choice. Tom, Becca, with me. We have to get to her before they do. The three fought their way through, dispatching their assailants with grim resolve. As they reached the safe zone's entrance, they realized the true nature of this so-called sanctuary. The gates were open, unguarded. The safe zone was a trap, a lure for the desperate and hopeful. Inside, Sophia was cornered by the attackers, their leader a woman with a scar cutting across her cheek. Hand her over, and we'll let the rest of you go, the woman demanded. Elena stepped forward, her green eyes hard as flint. She's not yours to take, the woman sneered. We'll see about that. In a desperate move, Martin lunged forward, his voice rising. You need her. She's the cure. The revelation struck the attackers, and for a moment, uncertainty flickered across their faces. Sophia, her back against the wall, looked at Elena, her eyes pleading. Elena, I don't want this. Elena took a deep breath, her decision made. You won't have to. We stand together. With a rallying cry, Elena and her group charged, catching the attackers off guard. The fight was brutal, but united, Elena's group pushed the attackers back. As the dust settled, Sophia was safe, but the cost of their victory was etched in the weary lines of their faces. Elena turned to the group, her voice firm. This place isn't safe. We leave at dawn. The survivors nodded, their faith in Elena's leadership restored, even as the reality of their situation pressed in on them. Sophia's immunity was both a blessing and a curse, one that had nearly torn them apart. As night fell over the safe zone, now revealed as anything but, Elena's resolve hardened. Humanity might be as great a threat as the undead, but she would protect her group, no matter the cost. The price of salvation was high, and the journey was far from over, but they would face it together. Chapter 12, Shades of Despair. In the cold light of morning, the group gathered in a circle, the remnants of the false safe zone casting long shadows across their faces. The air was thick with tension, each breath a struggle against the growing sense of despair. Tom kicked at the dirt, his voice barely hiding his frustration. We put our trust in this place, and for what? We're no better off than before. Becca sat on a fallen log, her fingers nervously playing with her locket. We can't lose hope. There has to be a way out of this. Elena stood tall despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. We keep moving. It's all we can do. Sophia, her black hair framing her face, looked up with resignation. Maybe there's nothing left for us out there. Martin, his spectacles askew, turned to Sophia. You might be our last chance. Your immunity, no, Elena cut in sharply. We're not resorting to that. The group fell silent, the unspoken thought hanging heavy in the air. Sophia's immunity was a balefire in the darkness, one that could lead to salvation or destruction. The silence was broken by a younger member of the group, a boy named Kevin. What if Sophia is right? What if there's nothing left? Elena met his gaze, her green eyes unwavering. Then we make something of what we've got. We survive. Sophia stood abruptly, her hazel eyes clouded. And if I choose to help, to let them use my blood for a cure, what then? Becca looked up, surprise and fear etched on her face. Sophia, you can't mean that. Martin interjected, his voice rising with excitement. It could mean the end of all this. We could go back to normal. Elena's hand moved to her knife, a reflex against the mounting pressure. We're not discussing this, not now. Sophia's shoulders sagged, the weight of her secret a tangible thing. It's my choice, Elena. Mine. The group's unity began to fray as the reality of their situation set in. The safe zone, once a glimmer of hope, was now a symbol of their shattered dreams. Tom paced, his face grim. We need a plan, Elena. We can't keep wandering without an end in sight. Elena took a deep breath, the role of leader a heavy mantle. Our plan is to survive, to keep each other safe. Sophia's voice was a whisper, yet it carried to each person huddled there. What if my sacrifice could save us all? The question lingered, a specter of the choices they faced. The group looked to Elena, their eyes searching for an answer, for a path forward amidst the shades of despair. Elena knew the decision would not be an easy one. The survival of the group, the fate of Sophia, and the remnants of their humanity all hung in the balance. The fall from grace was not just a descent into savagery, it was the challenge of holding on to hope when all seemed lost. Chapter 13, The the fracture. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the group as they huddled together. The air was thick with tension, and the faces around the campfire were drawn with worry and fatigue. Elena stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands. "We need to talk about what we're going to do next." Martin adjusted his glasses, looking from Elena to Sophia. "We've already talked. Sophia's immunity could save us all." Sophia wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and vulnerable. "I never said I wanted to be anyone's experiment," she said softly. Tom, who had been sitting on an old, overturned bucket, stood up to join the conversation. "Martin's right. We're running out of options, and Sophia might be our best one." Becca, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, turned to Tom, her voice rising in protest. "We can't just decide her fate for her. It's not right." The debate grew heated as more voices joined in. Some agreed with Martin and Tom, seeing Sophia as a signal of hope. Others sided with Becca, arguing for her right to choose. Elena listened, her brows furrowed. This isn't just about survival. It's about keeping our humanity. If we force Sophia to do something against her will, what does that make us? Kevin, the young boy who had stayed quiet until now, piped up. "But what if she's okay with it? What if she wants to help?" All eyes turned to Sophia, who looked back at them with a mix of fear and resolve. I don't know what I want." "See?" Martin said, stepping closer to her. "She might agree. We have to try." Elena stepped between Martin and Sophia, her stance protective. "Back off, Martin. We're not doing anything until Sophia makes up her mind." The group's unity began to crumble as arguments broke out, each person struggling with the moral implications of their desperate situation. "I'm out," Tom declared suddenly, his voice cutting through the noise. "If we're not going to use what we've got, I'm better off on my own." Several others nodded, siding with Tom, their expressions hardening with the decision to break away. Becca's eyes filled with tears as she watched the group divide. "How did we get to this point?" Elena put an arm around her, squeezing tight. "We're scared, Becca. Fear makes people do things they wouldn't normally do." As Tom and his faction gathered their meager belongings, Sophia made her choice. "I'll go with them," she announced, her voice steadier than before. Maybe I can help. Maybe I can end this." Elena's heart sank, but she nodded, respecting Sophia's decision. "Be careful," she said, her voice thick with unspoken emotion. As the group split into two, heading in different directions, the fracture was complete. The bonds that had once held them together had been stretched too thin, finally snapping under the weight of fear and desperation. Elena led her smaller faction away, the sense of loss heavy in her chest. They moved through the forest, the trees whispering secrets as they passed. The fall from grace was not just a descent into darkness. It was the moments when hope and humanity were put to the ultimate test. Chapter 14, Crescendo of Chaos. Elena's group hunkered behind the crumbled walls of an old factory, its bricks pockmarked from the wear of time and neglect. Tom's faction was visible across the open ground, obscured by the rusted-out shells of cars and the skeletal remains of dead trees. "Can't believe it's come to this," murmured Kevin, peering through a gap in the wall. Elena glanced at him, her determined face streaked with grime. "Stay focused. We're not here to fight them. We're here to survive." The strained silence was shattered by the sound of gunfire. Tom's voice rang out, clear and sharp as a bell. "Elena, this is on you. You could have prevented this." Elena stepped into view, her hands empty to show she meant no harm. "Tom, nobody wants this. Put down the guns. We can figure this out." From the opposite side, Sophia's frightened face appeared beside Tom. "Elena, they're coming." The unmistakable groans of the undead began to fill the air, a harrowing soundtrack to the standoff. The two factions, once united in survival, now faced a greater threat together. "We gotta team up," yelled Becca, her blue eyes scanning the incoming tide of zombies. Martin, standing beside Tom, adjusted his glasses with shaking hands. "There's too many." Elena nodded at Becca's words. "She's right. Our fight's with them, not each other." Tom, his face a mask of regret and sweat, nodded curtly. "Fine. But after this, we're done." The two groups converged, forming a rough line of defense as the first wave of zombies crashed against them. Elena fought alongside Tom, their movements synchronized in the dance of survival. Sophia, her small figure a contrast to the chaos around her, wielded a piece of rebar with surprising skill, keeping the creatures at bay. The fight was relentless, each fallen zombie replaced by two more. The air was thick with the sounds of battle, the clash of metal, the cries of the living, the snarls of the dead. Kevin, who had never lost hope, shouted encouragement to the others. "We can do this together." Amidst the chaos, Martin fell, a zombie's teeth sinking into his arm. Sophia screamed, the sound piercing the din of battle. Helena rushed to his side, dispatching the attacker with a swift strike. She looked down at Martin, whose eyes were wide with shock and pain. "Hold on, Martin. We'll get through this." But as the horde pressed in, it became clear that not all of them would make it out. Sacrifices were made, brave acts of heroism, as one by one, members of the group stayed behind to hold the line. In the end, it was Helena and a handful of survivors who found themselves backed into the factory, the horde clawing at the barricaded doors. Helena looked at the faces of those who remained, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. The crescendo of chaos had reached its peak, and in its wake, Helena knew that the true test of her leadership had only just begun. As the barricade began to give way, Helena's voice rose above the chaos. "Whatever happens, we've made it this far. Don't give up now. Fight." The survivors rallied, standing shoulder to shoulder with Helena as the undead broke through. Together, they faced the onslaught, ready to defend their lives to the very last. The crescendo of chaos had brought them to the brink, but they would face it as they had everything else together. Chapter 15. The abyss gazes back. The gray sky loomed overhead as Helena and her dwindling group took shelter in an abandoned warehouse. The walls, lined with empty shelves and scattered debris, offered a somber reflection of their reality. Helena sat with her back against a cold metal shelf, her eyes scanning the faces of her companions. Kevin's youthful countenance was marred by a grim set to his mouth, a stark contrast to the eager spirit he once showed. "You did what you had to, Helena," Kevin said, breaking the heavy silence. "You protected us." Helena's response was measured, her tone even. "Did I? Or did I become the very thing we've been running from?" Becca, huddled in a corner, with a tattered blanket wrapped around her shoulders, chimed in softly. "We're not them, Helena. We're not." Across the room, Tom, whose allegiance had once wavered, leaned against a rusted forklift, his arms crossed. "It's us or them. You know that." Helena closed her eyes, the echoes of the past battles ringing in her ears. "I used to think it was clear, who we were, what we stood for. Now, I'm not so sure." Sophia, her slender frame perched on an old wooden crate, wrapped her arms around herself. "I feel it too, the darkness. It's hard to push away." The group fell into contemplation, the weight of their actions, their losses, pressing down on them. The line between survival and savagery had blurred, leaving them to wonder what remained of their humanity. Kevin stood up, pacing the dusty floor. "We can't let it win, the darkness. We've got to keep fighting, not just the zombies, but the despair too." Helena looked up at him, a flicker of pride in her eyes. "You're right. We've faced the abyss, and it's our choice whether we let it consume us." Tom straightened, his voice gruff but resolute. "We've seen the worst, but we're still here, still human. We can hold on to that." Sophia's gaze met Helena's, a silent understanding passing between them. "We fight, not just to survive, but to remember who we are." The group nodded, a quiet determination settling in. The battle had ended, but the war within raged on. They would face it together, standing against the darkness that threatened to engulf them. Helena rose to her feet, her green eyes clear, her voice strong. "We've stared into the abyss, but we won't let it gaze back into us. We're survivors, and we'll never forget that." As they prepared to leave the warehouse, their sanctuary from the chaos outside, Helena's group felt a renewed sense of purpose. They would confront the horrors they had endured and rebuke the darkness within, holding fast to the light of their remaining humanity. The fall from grace had tested them, but they would rise above it, their spirits unbroken. Chapter 16. The Scars of Survival. In the hushed stillness of an abandoned library, the survivors sat amongst toppled bookshelves and scattered pages, their faces illuminated by the weak light of a flickering candle. The quiet was a stark contrast to the chaos they had endured. Helena, her green eyes reflecting the flame, broke the silence. "We can't ignore what we've had to do to stay alive, but we've got to find a way to move forward." Becca leaned against a desk, her fingers absently tracing the outline of her locket. I just keep thinking about all those people the things we had to do. Tom sat with his back against a wall, his eyes fixed on a distant point. Yeah, but if we didn't, we'd be one of them by now. That's the hard truth. Sophia, her once youthful face now marred by streaks of dirt and a hardened expression, interjected. Doesn't make it any easier to sleep at night knowing that. Kevin, sitting cross-legged on the floor, fiddled with a frayed edge of his shoe. Maybe we can find some way to make things right, you know? Start helping people again. Elena nodded at Kevin's words. That's the spirit we need. We can't change what's happened, but we can shape what happens next. The group contemplated in silence, the weight of their past deeds a heavy shroud. The library, once a lantern of knowledge and hope, now served as a stark reminder of all that had been lost. Tom cleared his throat, his voice stronger than before. We've all got scars, yeah? But we're still here, still breathing. That counts for something. Becca looked up, her blue eyes meeting Tom's. We've got to keep our humanity. That's how we honor those who didn't make it. Sophia stood up, her frame casting a long shadow on the wall. I want to help, not because of what I am, but because of who we are. We're not just survivors, we're still human. Elena rose, her figure resolute in the dimness. Then let's make a pact here, among these ruins of the past. We'll fight, not just against the undead, but for each other, for the chance of a better day. The group stood together, their determination a shared bond. Outside, the world was overrun by creatures that once were human, but inside the library, the survivors made a stand against the darkness that had crept into their hearts. The scars of survival were deep, both seen and unseen, but as they prepared to leave their temporary refuge, the survivors carried with them a renewed sense of purpose. They would confront the horrors of the world not with despair, but with the unyielding resolve to reclaim their future, one day at a time. Chapter 17, A Harrowing Horizon. Elena surveyed the high-walled compound that the group had stumbled upon in their latest wanderings. It was an old school, its gates sturdy, and its courtyard wide. For the first time in too long, they had a space that felt safe. I gotta say, this place ain't half bad, Tom said, his arms folded as he leaned against the fence, eyeing the perimeter. Elena glanced at him, nodding. It could be a good spot to catch our breath, at least for a little while. Sophia emerged from the main building, her eyes bright with the prospect of a respite. There's a library in there, and a clinic, too. We could really use the supplies. Becca, who had been quiet, spoke up. What about after? Are we just going to stay here forever? Elena kicked at the dirt, considering. We have to keep looking forward, Becca. There might be somewhere better out there. Kevin, sitting on the steps with a map spread out before him, pointed to a spot. What about here? It looks like it could be a town or something. Maybe it's worth checking out? Elena walked over and crouched beside him, her eyes tracing the lines on the map. Could be risky. We don't know what's out there. Tom straightened up, his face set in a determined line. Only one way to find out, right? Sophia sat down next to Kevin. I'm in. We can't just stop trying. Elena looked around at the expectant faces of her group. They were battered and weary, but their spirit was unbroken. She smiled, a rare gesture that warmed the hearts of her companions. All right, we'll stay here for a few days, gather what we can, and then we'll head out to see what's on the horizon. Together. The group nodded in agreement, their resolve firm. They had faced countless horrors, fought unimaginable battles, and yet they pushed forward, driven by the hope of finding a haven free from the terror that had consumed the world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over their temporary sanctuary, Elena and her group knew that their journey was far from over. The horizon was harrowing, filled with unknowns, but it also held the promise of a new beginning. And with Elena's leadership reaffirmed, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead, together.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe now and visit our website, StoryWave.ai, to start creating your own generative audiobooks today. StoryWave is the only true on-demand entertainment portal.